The vastness of space stretched endlessly, a cold and silent void between the stars. Yet, in this silence, there was a single beacon of hope, a speck of light amidst the encroaching darkness of the galaxy. The planet Elysium, home to the last human colony, orbited a distant, dying sun. It had been many years since the first wave of the Galactic Empire's conquest swept through the known universe, subjugating countless species, bending them to its will. The Empire, with its towering fleets and advanced weaponry, had obliterated everything in its path. But the humans of Elysium, resilient, defiant, and unyielding, refused to fall. Captain Alina Stroud paced briskly through the command center of the underground fortress, her boots echoing on the polished metal floors. Her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, knuckles white from the pressure, but there was no mistaking the fire in her eyes. She was a leader, the last of her kind, tasked with safeguarding humanity's future. The transmission from the Empire had arrived just moments ago, a final ultimatum delivered with chilling precision: surrender or face annihilation. It was a request they had received too many times to count, and yet each time it was met with the same answer: defiance. "Status report," she barked, her voice unwavering despite the weight of the situation. Lieutenant Terran, her second-in-command, looked up from the array of holographic displays, his face a mixture of concern and resolve. "We've confirmed the Empire's fleet is entering the system. At least 50 capital ships, along with multiple support vessels and droid battalions," Terran replied, his voice low. "We don't have the firepower to engage them directly. If they attack, it'll be over within hours." Captain Stroud's lips tightened. She knew the numbers all too well. The Empire's forces were vast, and their weapons were devastatingly advanced. They had crushed the resistance in countless systems before. But the humans of Elysium were different. For all their might, the Empire had underestimated one thing: the spirit of humanity. "We don't need to win through force, Lieutenant. We just need to survive long enough to show the galaxy that the Empire isn't invincible," Alina said, her voice firm, her gaze never leaving the viewport that displayed the dark expanse of space beyond. The flickering lights of distant stars were like the last embers of a dying fire, but to her they represented something more, something worth fighting for. Terran nodded. "The first wave of evacuees has already been sent to the underground shelters. Our fleet is on standby, but I don't know how much good it'll do. If they attack with full force?" "They will," Captain Stroud interrupted, her voice hardening with certainty. "And we will be ready?" Across the room, senior strategist Rhea Morn studied the latest tactical projections. She was an expert in unconventional warfare, and she had been working on a desperate plan to strike at the heart of the Empire's arrogance. Though it was a long shot, it was all they had left. "I've completed the simulations for the diversion tactic," Rhea said, looking up from her station. "It's not perfect, but it could buy us enough time. We've integrated the planet's magnetic fields to scramble the Empire's targeting systems, and I've arranged for a series of surprise attacks on their supply lines. The problem is that it won't last long. They'll adapt quickly." Alina's eyes lit up with a spark of determination. "We don't need it to last. We just need to make them believe we're stronger than we are." The room fell into a tense silence, each person present fully aware of the stakes. If they failed, humanity would be wiped out, reduced to nothing more than a footnote in the Empire's twisted history. But if they succeeded, even in a small part, it would send a message across the galaxy. It would remind everyone that humanity could never be extinguished by fear, no matter how overwhelming the odds seemed. Outside, the rumbling of distant explosions could be heard. The Empire was making its move. And in that moment, as Captain Stroud stood with her back straight and her eyes unwavering, the weight of what was about to unfold pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had never been one to run from a fight. But now, for the first time, she was faced with the possibility that this might be their final stand. The fate of humanity rested on her shoulders, and despite the overwhelming power of the Empire, one thing was clear: she would not let Elysium fall without a fight. Defiance was the only thing she could give the Empire. And that defiance would echo through the stars, loud enough for the galaxy to hear. The hum of alarms echoed through the underground fortress as the first of the Empire's fleet dropped out of hyperspace, filling the entire sky above Elysium with the vast shadows of warships. The star at the center of the system, already in its death throes, cast a dim, sickly light over the horizon, but the ships, so many of them, blocked out even that light as they gathered above the last human colony. Captain Stroud stood tall in the command center, her gaze locked on the screen, her thoughts racing. "This is it," she muttered under her breath, voice steady despite the chaos around her. "All systems ready?" "Ready, Captain," Lieutenant Terran replied, his fingers flying across the holographic console. Shield generators are powered up. Tactical drones are in position. Evacuation protocol is proceeding without a hitch. We're as prepared as we can be. Good. Stroud turned to Rhea, who was working furiously at a console nearby. How's the diversion plan looking? Rhea glanced up, her eyes sharp. The magnetic field is fluctuating more than expected, but it's holding. We'll have a window of about 20 minutes to launch the surprise attacks. I've positioned the drones to strike their weaker points, but we'll need every advantage we can get. We don't have 20 minutes, Stroud replied grimly, her fingers tapping the edge of the console. The Empire's never been one for patience. We need to hit them hard and fast. Across the room, a holographic map of the star system flickered, highlighting the positions of the Imperial fleet. The sheer size of the armada was staggering. At the center, the flagship Imperial Justice loomed, a massive vessel bristling with turrets, weapons and shields powerful enough to vaporize entire cities with a single strike. Stroud's eyes narrowed. We've got one chance to make this count? She turned toward the tactical officers. Prepare the first wave. Initiate the decoy strikes on their supply routes. Rhea, I need you to get those drones into position. Now. Without another word, Rhea turned back to her console, working with a focused intensity. Outside the command center, the rumble of the fortress's engines vibrated the walls. The fighters and bombers would soon be launched, small but deadly in their own right. But against the sheer power of the Empire's fleets, it was the human will to survive that would have to be their greatest weapon. The battle for Elysium began just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The Empire's first salvo of firepower rained down from orbit, targeting cities and military installations. The ground shook as the skies above were set ablaze. But the humans of Elysium were not unprepared. Their weapons, though primitive in comparison to Imperial tech, were effective enough to put up a fierce resistance. Every building, every tunnel, every trench was lined with explosives and traps designed to delay the Empire's advance. The sky above was filled with the shrieking roar of human fighters scrambling to intercept incoming Imperial bombers, while on the ground, the Elysian infantry fought with desperate courage. I've got them in range, Terran called out, his voice laced with a mix of anticipation and fear. Launching the first wave of drones now. A sudden flash of light illuminated the command center as the drones activated. Stroud watched as they sped toward the Imperial fleet, weaving through the incoming barrage of enemy fire. They were small and swift, outfitted with cloaking devices and long-range EMP warheads. Their mission was clear: disable the Empire's targeting systems and create as much chaos as possible. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the plan might actually work. The first few drones detonated in a brilliant cascade of sparks and explosions, their EMP pulses crippling several of the smaller support ships in the Empire's formation. But then a horrifying realization hit: the Empire was adapting too quickly. Within minutes, their countermeasures activated, and the once pulsing field of chaos grew calm again. We've got incoming, Rhea shouted, her voice tight with urgency. The Empire's adaptive shields are blocking the drone's EMPs. They've recalibrated. We're running out of time. Keep them off us for as long as you can, Captain Stroud ordered, her face set in grim determination. We'll hold them off as long as it takes. Evacuation continues, yes? Yes, Captain, Terran confirmed, his fingers moving at a blur across the controls. They're getting the last civilians to the shelters. We just have to buy them more time. Outside, the ground forces continued their valiant stand. A series of sudden explosions on the enemy supply ships rattled their fleet, courtesy of the last of the drones. But the Imperial warships retaliated immediately, launching a brutal bombardment that destroyed several key resistance positions. Stroud could hear the rumbling of explosions even inside the command center, and for a brief second she felt the familiar weight of despair settling in. But then something stirred within her. The human spirit was undying. They would never back down. Not as long as there was breath left in their bodies. All units push forward. Stroud shouted into the comms, her voice ringing with renewed vigor. This is our home. We'll fight for it to the last. With a battle cry that echoed across the communications channels, the humans of Elysium surged forward, their resistance defiant against the might of the Empire. Though the battle was only beginning, one thing was certain: the Empire would never forget the fury of the last human colony. The black void of space surrounding Elysium seemed to close in around the planet as the Empire's fleet loomed ever larger, an unstoppable wall of destruction descending from the heavens. Yet, within the heart of the human colony, There was a defiance so powerful that it seemed to echo across the stars. Captain Stroud stood in the midst of the command center, eyes fixed on the tactical hologram. The skirmishes on the ground were fierce, but the Empire's firepower was proving overwhelming. Human fighters had taken down a few enemy ships, and sabotage strikes had been launched, but it was clear, the Empire wasn't going to simply let this be a show of force. They had come to annihilate. And they were only just getting started. Captain, Lieutenant Terran's voice broke through the tense silence. The Empire's fleet is tightening its grip. They've deployed their heavy artillery and the bombardment is increasing. We've lost contact with several of our forward positions. Stroud's jaw tightened. Every word Terran spoke felt like a punch to her gut. But there was no time for hesitation. The entire colony was at risk. Elysium wasn't just a planet, it was the last bastion of humanity. The last hope. How long until the secondary defensive line is operational? Stroud asked, her voice crisp with authority. Less than 15 minutes, Terran replied. The underground missile silos are coming online, but they're limited. We can slow them down for a bit longer, but we're outgunned. And the drones? Stroud pressed, her mind working rapidly. The diversion strategy had been less effective than they'd hoped, but there had to be something more they could do. Anything to tip the scales even slightly. Rhea Morn, the senior strategist, was already at her console, fingers flying across the keys. We've sent every last drone we could into the fray, Captain. They're still causing some disruption to the Imperial shields, but not enough to do any real damage. However, she hesitated, and when she looked up, there was a gleam of something dangerous in her eyes. Stroud's gaze locked onto her. What is it? I've been working on an experimental device, something that might just turn the tide, Rhea said, her voice low but filled with intensity. It's not ready, but with your permission I can have it deployed within the hour. It's a risk, but it's our best shot at disabling their flagship, the Imperial Justice. Stroud felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. The Imperial Justice was the heart of the entire fleet. Destroying it would cripple the Empire's command structure and send a shockwave through their forces. But the risks were monumental. The device Rhea spoke of was untested, and even if it worked, it would require a strike on the most heavily guarded vessel in the Empire. Do it, Stroud said without hesitation. If there's even a chance this could work, we'll take it. Rhea nodded, already diving into the complex task of coordinating the strike. The rest of the room fell into a focused, intense quiet as the strategy began to unfold. Meanwhile, above the planet, the Imperial fleet began to launch wave after wave of assault ships, their massive forms piercing through the clouds of fire and smoke that choked the skies above Elysium. The first strike had hit the planet hard, but now the Empire was ready for the final assault. Their bombardment would not stop until Elysium was nothing but rubble. On the ground, the human resistance was dwindling. Soldiers fought with everything they had, their weapons blazing, their courage unwavering. The Imperial troops, robotic, cold, and efficient, were everywhere, their movements calculated, their guns never missing their mark. Yet the humans fought with a desperate fury born of a love for their home. In the midst of the carnage, Alina Stroud found herself at the front lines, her rifle raised and firing, each shot taking down an enemy soldier with lethal precision. She fought alongside her people, her family, and though she knew they couldn't win by sheer numbers alone, their tenacity kept them going. The hope, the fire that refused to die, that was their true weapon. We're not done yet, she shouted over the comms to her scattered forces. We're Elysium. We will never surrender. A burst of static crackled on the channel, followed by Terran's urgent voice. Captain. We're detecting something on long-range sensors. A massive energy signature. It's coming from the Imperial Justice. It's charging something, Captain. We need to move now. Stroud's heart sank. The Empire had come prepared for their resistance, but she hadn't anticipated a direct assault of this magnitude. The Imperial Justice wasn't just launching another barrage, it was preparing a superweapon, a planet cracker that would obliterate Elysium in a single strike. Shut it down, Rhea? Stroud shouted. Do whatever you need to do. I need that weapon neutralized or this ends right here. Rhea's fingers flew across her console, her face pale but resolute. I'm activating the device now. It's going to be close, Captain. We'll have to hit their core systems directly. It's the only way. Then we fight to the core, Stroud said. If this is our last stand, let them know we fought like hell to the very end. Above Elysium, the Imperial Justice powered up its weapon, a massive energy beam gathering at the heart of the warship's core. Time was running out. The weapon was about to fire. But just as the beam began to surge, the experimental device Rhea had activated sent out a pulse, a shockwave that reverberated through the Empire's fleet. For a moment, everything went still. The Imperial Justice staggered, its weapons faltering. The pulse had struck its core systems, disabling the superweapon and throwing its systems into disarray. Now? Stroud roared. Now, before they can recover. With a massive coordinated strike from every remaining fighter and resistance force, the final push was made toward the Imperial Justice. The humans of Elysium fought with all the fury of a species cornered but not broken. The Empire's arrogance had blinded them to the most dangerous force in the galaxy, humanity's unyielding will to survive. The Imperial Justice was wounded, but the battle was far from over. Elysium still stood, battered and scarred, but not yet broken. The fight for the last human colony had just begun. The Imperial Justice wavered in orbit, its once imposing form now crippled, drifting like a dying giant. The energy pulse from Rhea's device had given the humans of Elysium a precious window of opportunity, but it wouldn't last long. The Empire, infuriated by the assault, would regroup and retaliate with a vengeance. Stroud knew they had only one shot, one chance to turn the tide in their favor. "Captain," Terran called, his voice tight with urgency. "The Empire's regrouping. Their remaining ships are forming a defensive perimeter around the Imperial Justice. It's only a matter of time before they launch a counterattack." Stroud's fingers tightened around the railing of the command center as she scanned the holographic displays. It was a beautiful, tragic sight, the very heart of the Empire now vulnerable, its defenses faltering. They had to strike now before the Empire could reorganize. There was no second chance. "Rhea," Stroud said, her voice low but filled with resolve, "can we activate the device again? Hit them when they least expect it?" Rhea's face was drawn with exhaustion, but there was still a fire in her eyes. "It's possible, Captain. The device still has some charge left. But it'll be weaker this time and I need time to recalibrate it. We could disrupt their systems for a few minutes, but that's it." "Then that's all we need," Stroud said, her tone hardening. "We'll buy you that time. Prepare the final assault. We hit them with everything we've got." On the surface of Elysium, the war raged on. The resistance was tired, their numbers dwindling with each passing hour, but they fought with relentless tenacity. The Imperial forces, heavily mechanized and efficient, advanced through the charred remnants of human cities. Every inch of ground was a battle. Every street corner a fortress. But amidst the chaos there was a sudden shift. The Empire's forces, those that had already moved in, began to falter. It was subtle at first, a hesitation in their movements, a slight pause in their attack patterns. The human resistance noticed it immediately. "Captain," Terran's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got reports coming in from all fronts. The Empire's troops, they're hesitant. They're questioning the orders coming from above." Stroud's mind raced. Could it be? Was it possible that the Empire's once absolute control was slipping? "Keep pressing them," she ordered, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "I don't care if they're questioning orders. We need every moment we can get." But inside her, a flicker of hope stirred. The Empire was not invincible. They had shown signs of weakness before, but this was something different. The spark of rebellion wasn't just flickering, it was spreading. "Rhea," Stroud called again, "how long until that pulse is ready?" "About 15 minutes, Rhea replied, glancing over her shoulder. "But the recalibration is risky. I'll need full access to their systems. If I can get close enough." "Then you're going," Stroud said. "You and a small strike team. Get in, get the pulse activated, and get out. We'll hold the line here." Rhea nodded, already tapping in coordinates. "Understood. I'll make it quick." The streets of the capital city were littered with the wreckage of battle. Torn buildings, smoldering vehicles, and the bodies of both soldiers and civilians. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and burnt metal. Yet as Rhea and her team moved through the ruins, something began to shift. Human soldiers, their faces grim but determined, stood taller, their steps faster. A ripple was spreading through the remaining pockets of resistance, one that could not be ignored. Rhea could feel it too. There was something in the air, something more than the tension of battle. She had seen it before, during the darkest days of the war, when a spark of hope turned into an inferno of defiance. It was the rebellion igniting. "Rhea," came Stroud's voice through the comms, sharp and clear. "The Empire's troops are beginning to retreat in some areas. It's not a full retreat, but it's a shift. We're getting some traction here." "That's because we're winning," Rhea replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Stay strong, Captain. We'll do our part." The team reached the Empire's forward command post, a heavily fortified structure nestled within the ruins of a former government building. Imperial droids and soldiers patrolled the area, their movements mechanical, unfeeling. But there was a vulnerability to their ranks, a crack in the facade. The Empire was spread too thin. "We're in," Rhea whispered as they breached the perimeter. "I've got access to their mainframe. I'm uploading the recalibration data now." The console in front of her hummed to life, and Rhea's fingers flew across the keys. But just as the data transfer reached 90%, the screen flickered, and the door behind her slammed open with a deafening crash. A squad of Imperial droids stormed into the room, blasters raised. "Get down," one of Rhea's team members yelled as they dove for cover. "Abort the mission." Stroud's voice blared over the comms. "Get out of there now." But Rhea didn't hesitate. She knew the stakes. With a swift motion, she pressed the final key. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the console as the pulse was sent. The droids faltered, their systems scrambling. Their blasters malfunctioned, firing wildly, and the oppressive hum of the Empire's presence seemed to momentarily shudder. The pulse had worked. But it wasn't enough to bring the Empire to its knees. It only bought them a few minutes. Rhea's team didn't wait for orders. They fought with the desperation of a species on the brink of extinction, determined to finish what had been started. The Empire's hold on the planet was weakening. "Get out!" Rhea shouted as they made their way to the extraction point. "Go, go, go!" As they retreated into the shadows of the city, the pulse continued to ripple through the Empire's systems, causing chaos and confusion. For a brief, fleeting moment, it felt as though the Empire was not invincible. Their iron grip on the galaxy was slipping. Back at the command center, Stroud's heart raced. "We've done it," she muttered to herself. "The spark of rebellion is lit." The battle for Elysium was far from over. But now they weren't just defending their home, they were leading a movement that could shake the galaxy itself. The Empire had underestimated them, and now they were going to pay the price. The last human colony would not fall. It would rise. The Empire, stunned by the unexpected pulse of resistance from Elysium, scrambled to regain control. Their flagship, the Imperial Justice, was crippled but not destroyed. The damage dealt by Rhea's pulse had been significant, disabling much of their command infrastructure, but the Empire was ruthless and had vast resources. They would not be so easily defeated. Above the planet, the Imperial fleet began to reorganize, their ships positioning themselves into tight formation, preparing for a full-scale counterattack. The calm before the storm settled in over Elysium like a heavy fog. Everyone knew the next wave would be far more deadly. Back in the command center, Captain Stroud stood in front of the tactical hologram, her face drawn but focused. "How long until we can launch the next assault?" she asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "Not long," Terran replied, tapping away at his console. "We've got the remaining fighters ready to go, and our secondary lines of defense are still operational. But the Empire has mobilized. I'm tracking 2 full battalions heading down to the surface, along with a fleet of bombardment ships. They're coming in fast." Stroud clenched her fists, trying to suppress the fear that threatened to bubble up. It wasn't just the enemy fleet that was coming. The Empire was sending down their elite troops, soldiers and droids specially trained to eliminate any remaining resistance with extreme prejudice. "We need to buy ourselves some time," Stroud muttered to herself. "Rhea, how much longer until the secondary pulse is ready?" "I've already started recalibrating it," Rhea's voice crackled over the comms. "But it's going to take longer than last time. The Empire's scrambling and so am I. It'll be at least another 30 minutes before we can launch. Then we have 30 minutes to make sure we're still standing when it's time to strike," Stroud replied, her mind already working through the best course of action. "We can't afford to be on the defensive. We have to hit them again, harder this time." The streets of the capital were a war zone, chaos reigning everywhere. What was once a shining city of human pride was now little more than a battleground. The ground shook with the thundering of Imperial footsteps as their forces advanced, crushing everything in their path. Explosions ripped through the air as bombs rained down from the sky, their impact sending shockwaves through the city's core. The few remaining fighters launched desperate counterattacks, weaving between buildings, but their numbers were thinning rapidly. Alina Stroud watched from the command center's observation deck as her soldiers scrambled to hold the line. Her heart broke for every life lost, but the fire of resistance still burned bright. They wouldn't give in. They couldn't. "We're ready to launch, Captain," Terran's voice broke through her reverie. "But there's a complication. Imperial Command just deployed their shock troopers, veteran soldiers, elite droids and heavy artillery." Stroud's jaw tightened. She had expected something like this. The Empire wasn't known for mercy, and now, with their fleet crippled, they were going to go all in on the surface battle. "I'll lead the charge," Stroud said, her voice low but resolute. "It's all or nothing. Get our troops into position." Rhea's small team was on the move again, trekking through the underbelly of the ruined capital, determined to reach the heart of the Imperial command. They had only one objective: to get close enough to deploy the recalibrated pulse that would cripple the Empire's fleet once and for all. The streets were eerily quiet now, save for the occasional blaster fire and the rumbling of distant explosions. The Empire was tightening its grip, but Elysium was far from surrendering. Rhea's eyes flickered over the topographical map of the city she carried on a portable data pad. "We're almost there," she said, leading the way through the crumbling streets. "Stay sharp." Her team moved in a tight formation, each member scanning their surroundings, weapons at the ready. The tension was palpable. Every corner held danger, droids lurking in the shadows, snipers perched on high vantage points. But they had come this far. They couldn't stop now. "Incoming!" One of her team members yelled as a blast ripped through a nearby building, sending debris flying. The shock troopers had found them. "Diversion," Rhea ordered, spinning to face the advancing enemy. "I'll finish the upload. You hold them off." The soldiers immediately took cover, opening fire on the advancing Imperial troops, but the shock troopers were methodical, relentless. They cut down the human soldiers with brutal efficiency, pushing forward without hesitation. Rhea, however, didn't flinch. She had no time for fear. With the datapad in hand, she continued the upload process, fingers dancing across the screen. She could feel the pulse building, ready to disrupt the Empire's communication systems once more. She just needed a few more seconds. "Rhea," one of her team members shouted. "They're closing in." "Almost there." Rhea gritted her teeth as the upload bar ticked toward completion. "Come on, come on." With a final flourish of her fingers, the pulse was released. A massive energy surge surged through the city, reaching up to the sky and infiltrating the Imperial ships in orbit. The Empire's command was shaken to its core, their fleet once again thrown into disarray. For a few moments, everything seemed to stop. The battle on the ground slowed, the Empire's shock troopers hesitating as their orders faltered. "Now?" Rhea yelled. The humans surged forward, catching the enemy off guard, their weapons blazing. The shock troopers, disoriented and momentarily vulnerable, were pushed back. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a glimmer of hope, a chance to press the advantage. Stroud, standing at the front of the resistance, felt the shift. She saw the shock troopers falter, the once unstoppable Imperial machine grinding to a halt for just a moment. That was all they needed. "To the skies!" Stroud bellowed. "We strike now. Take the fight to them." Fighter ships, still intact from the earlier assault, roared into the air, weaving through the skies in tight formations. Every human fighter, every remaining resistance force, converged on the Imperial forces. Their final assault had begun. The Empire was in disarray. They had underestimated the humans of Elysium, and now they were going to learn just how wrong they were. The last human colony wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. It was fighting for freedom, for the future of humanity. And no matter how overwhelming the odds, Elysium would stand defiant. The Empire would not crush them. Not today. Not ever. The Empire's command structure was in chaos. Their communication systems, crippled by the pulse launched by Rhea, were in a state of disarray. The Imperial Justice, still heavily damaged from its earlier vulnerability, was now a shadow of its former self, and its crew struggled to regain control. Imperial forces on the ground were disorganized, shaken by the unexpected resistance, their usual calculated precision replaced with hesitation. For the first time in years, the Empire was facing the possibility of defeat, not from an alien invasion or some unknown force, but from the last surviving humans. A rebellion that had started with a single spark was now threatening to engulf the entire Empire. Yet the Empire would not go down quietly. They still had their strength, their overwhelming numbers, their fleet, and their relentless resolve. And even with their systems disrupted, they were capable of one final devastating blow. In the command center, Captain Stroud stood with a grim expression, watching the holographic map of Elysium unfold. The Empire was regathering its forces. Their remaining ships were consolidating around the planet in a last-ditch effort to wipe out the resistance once and for all. "Report, Terran," Stroud barked. Her mind raced as she considered their options. Time was running out, and the battle was escalating faster than she anticipated. "They're deploying a new weapon, Captain," Terran said, his voice tense. "I'm picking up a massive energy signature. It's coming from the Imperial Justice, and it's unlike anything we've seen before. Stroud's eyes narrowed. A weapon. What kind of weapon? Terran shook his head, his hands flying over the controls. It's hard to say. But whatever it is, it's powerful. If it's allowed to fire, it'll wipe out everything in its path. If we don't stop it, Elysium is finished. We don't have a choice, Stroud muttered, her mind spinning. She looked over to Rhea, who was still working on recalibrating the pulse weapon. Rhea, is there anything we can do? Rhea looked up from her console, exhaustion in her eyes but determination in her voice. I can try to send another pulse to disrupt it, but I need to get close to the flagship again. I'll need cover and a diversion. I'll go with you, Stroud said without hesitation. We're not sitting here while the Empire tries to wipe us off the map. The streets of Elysium were eerily quiet for the first time in days. The fighting had reached a brief lull as both sides reassessed their positions. But that wouldn't last long. The Empire's ships still hovered above, waiting for the order to launch their final strike. They hadn't given up on their mission to eradicate humanity. They wouldn't. Stroud and Rhea's strike team moved swiftly through the shadows, their destination clear. The heart of the Empire's orbital defenses, where they could launch the final pulse and cripple the Empire's weapon before it could fire. They reached the designated zone, a dilapidated communications tower that had once been a proud symbol of humanity's technological achievements. Now, it was little more than a skeleton, its once powerful systems barely functional, but it still had enough power to serve as a relay for their last chance at survival. Rhea hacked into the tower's systems, bringing the aging equipment online. The pulse is ready, she said, her voice cold and focused. Now we just need to make sure we're in range of the Imperial Justice. We'll need a clear shot, just a few moments of power to hit their core systems. Stroud's eyes darted toward the sky, watching the Imperial ships above. The silence was deafening. Then, from the heavens came a flash of light, a streak of brilliance brighter than 1,000 suns. It was the Empire's new weapon. A blinding energy beam shot from the Imperial Justice, tearing through the atmosphere, the air itself seeming to burn as the beam grew larger. It was aimed directly at the heart of Elysium, the final blow. Rhea? Stroud shouted. Now? Rhea activated the pulse. A wave of energy surged from the communications tower, streaking toward the flagship in the sky. For a heartbeat, Stroud thought they might have failed, that the Empire's weapon was too powerful to stop. But then the beam from the Imperial Justice faltered. It sputtered, its momentum slowing as the pulse disrupted its trajectory. And then it died. The Empire's weapon, the weapon they had staked everything on, fizzled into nothingness. A cheer went up from the resistance forces below, but Stroud didn't allow herself to breathe a sigh of relief. The battle wasn't over. The Empire still had their fleet and now they were furious. We've bought ourselves some time, Stroud said, looking over to Rhea. But they won't stop. We need to keep the pressure on. We can't let them regroup. In space, the Empire's remaining ships went silent. The loss of their weapon was a major blow, but there was still one option left. The Empire's high command had issued a final order. They were prepared to sacrifice everything. From the depths of the Imperial Justice, a new wave of ships began to deploy. But this wasn't a standard fleet. These ships were faster, deadlier, and better armed. The Empire was pushing its last reserves into battle, sending everything it had left in a final effort to crush the last human colony. The Resistance fighters saw them coming, an armada of destruction sweeping toward the surface, determined to finish the job. Stroud watched as the fleet descended, the sky darkening with their presence. They're coming in fast, Terran's voice crackled over the comms. The last of their fleet. They'll be on us in minutes. Stroud clenched her fists. We're not going down without a fight. Get all available fighters in the air. No retreat. No surrender. As the Empire's ships began their descent, the human resistance made one final stand. Fighter jets streaked across the sky, engaging the Empire's fleet in a deadly dance of gunfire and explosions. On the ground, Stroud and her soldiers prepared for a brutal clash that would decide the fate of Elysium. The battle was nothing short of chaos. The Empire's final forces came down with all the fury of a collapsing star, but the humans of Elysium fought with everything they had. They knew it was their last chance. If they lost here, humanity would be lost forever. Stroud, leading her fighters through the storm, looked up at the sky. The Empire's might seemed limitless, but so was her resolve. Today, Stroud said through gritted teeth, we finish this. Elysium stands. The final battle for humanity had begun. And no matter the cost, Stroud and her people would fight to the very end. The Empire might have the power, but Elysium had the will to survive. And that made all the difference. The battle raged overhead, the sky an inferno of explosions as the final wave of the Empire's fleet descended upon Elysium. Imperial ships, sleek and deadly, cut through the air like jagged knives, sending torrents of fire down on the ground below. The very atmosphere seemed to crackle with tension, the remnants of Elysium's once vibrant cities now reduced to smoking ruins. But the resistance didn't flinch. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they fought on, driven by the sheer will to survive. Stroud stood at the forefront, eyes scanning the sky as her fighter jets weaved through the oncoming barrage of laser fire. The Empire had thrown everything it had left at them, but the human spirit, bruised and battered, refused to die. It was a lesson the Empire had never fully understood. No matter how many times they struck, humanity always found a way to rise. "Captain," Terran's voice came through the comms, calm but urgent. "The Empire's new ships are tearing through our defenses. We can't hold them much longer." Stroud's jaw clenched. "We don't need to hold them. We need to break them." From below, the city trembled with the force of another Imperial bombardment. Stroud could hear the screams of her soldiers, the crackle of blasters, the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on the charred remains of the battlefield. She gritted her teeth and stood taller, lifting her calm to her mouth. "Keep fighting," she ordered, her voice crackling with determination. "We've done this before. We can do it again. Every one of you is a symbol of humanity's defiance. We will not fall today. Not now. Not ever." And with that, she turned, leading her squadron of fighters into the sky, straight into the heart of the Empire's descending fleet. On the ground, Rhea watched the chaos unfold from the heart of Elysium's ruined city. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the comms feed, her fingers trembling over the control panel. The pulse device she'd worked tirelessly to recalibrate had been a lifeline, but it was now a desperate gamble. Without it, the Empire would strike with overwhelming force. She had to act quickly. A small group of resistance fighters had secured the last remaining anti-aircraft cannons, positioning them at key points across the city to defend against the Empire's ships. But the weapons were only so effective. Against the full force of the Empire, they were mere pebbles against an avalanche. Rhea knew they couldn't win without a final strike, a blow so devastating that it would leave the Empire reeling, forcing them to retreat. But the question remained, could they deliver that blow? Rhea had no illusions. Time was running out. If she didn't get the recalibrated pulse online and into the Empire's fleet, Elysium would fall. And humanity would be extinguished in the blink of an eye. Her team moved swiftly through the ruins, dodging blaster fire and debris. A fresh wave of Imperial soldiers had descended on the city, and their mechanized assault droids were already setting up base near the remaining resistance forces. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and burning flesh. Rhea didn't have time for fear. She had one mission. She ducked into the basement of a dilapidated building, where the pulse device was hidden beneath a blanket of old tech and shattered machinery. A sharp pang of relief washed over her when she saw it. The pulse was still intact, still functional. "Rhea," a voice crackled through her comms. It was Stroud. "You're about to get company. We're pulling back to give you some cover. Do whatever it takes. We can't hold off the Empire much longer." "I'm on it," Rhea replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil surrounding them. "Get your people out of there. I'll handle the rest." With the press of a button, the pulse activated. Rhea's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the device power up. She could feel the hum of energy building beneath her feet, a quiet tremor that promised to change everything. If she could just send one final pulse to disrupt the Empire's flagship, just one more chance, then they might have a fighting chance. In space, Stroud led her squadron into the heart of the Empire's forces. The battle was savage, with explosions tearing through the ranks of both sides. The Empire's ships fired relentlessly, cutting through the air like scythes, while the resistance fighters twisted and turned to avoid their deadly fire. But Stroud had no time for fear. She dodged another volley, sending her fighter into a dizzying loop before coming back on target. The Empire was relentless, but she was not about to let them win. "Stay close," she ordered over the comms. "We break their formation, we break them." The next few minutes were chaos. The sky was a writhing mass of energy, fire, and wreckage. Stroud's squadron swerved through the thick of the battle, weaving between the massive warships and blasting their turrets as they went. Terran's voice came through, barely audible over the deafening noise. "We've got a clear opening. The Imperial Justice is vulnerable. Half its weapons are offline." Stroud's heart leaped into her throat. This was the moment. They could do it. "Lock on the target," she commanded. "All units, focus fire. This is it. The squadron broke apart, each fighter locking onto the massive flagship of the Empire. Stroud's hands were steady as she aimed her ship's targeting systems directly at the heart of the Imperial Justice. The Empire had relied on its impenetrable defenses, its overwhelming firepower. Now it was time to tear through that arrogance. Fire. The sky erupted as a concentrated barrage of missiles and laser fire hit the Imperial Justice in quick succession. The flagship shook, its massive form buckling under the weight of the Resistance's strike. The impact tore through the outer hull, leaving gaping wounds in the ship's metal surface. For the first time it looked vulnerable. But the Empire wasn't finished. A final blast fired from the Imperial Justice, sending Stroud's fighter into a spiral. For a heart-stopping moment she thought she was finished. The controls flickered, alarms blared, but somehow through sheer willpower, Stroud managed to regain control. "I'm still here," she growled through gritted teeth. Back on the ground, Rhea's pulse device hummed with energy. It was working. She could feel the pulse rippling through the city as it connected with the Empire's flagship. For a split second, everything seemed to slow. The Empire's fleet shuddered, its ships faltering, their systems crashing. The pulse had reached them. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The pulse had done its job, but the Empire was still alive, still fighting. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. Stroud's squadron regrouped, ready to finish the fight. The Resistance would press on no matter the cost. The Empire had underestimated them for too long. And now, the humans of Elysium were fighting not just for their survival, but for the future of humanity. No one had ever stood against the Empire like this. And in the heart of battle they would prove they could win. The battle had become a blur, chaos, fire, and smoke. The last of the Empire's ships were still clinging to life, their once formidable strength now hanging by a thread. Stroud's squadron fought with everything they had, their fighters darting in and out of enemy lines, picking off ships as they went. The Imperial Justice, battered and broken, continued to hover ominously above the battlefield, but its once imposing presence was now a mere shadow of what it had been. The Resistance had dealt blow after blow to the Empire, but the cost had been staggering. The streets of Elysium were littered with the fallen, both human and imperial. The cries of the wounded echoed through the city's ruins, a tragic reminder of how far the war had come. The skies were darkened with smoke, but there was a faint glimmer of light, humanity's spirit, unbroken, still shining through the storm. Stroud, still at the helm of her fighter, scanned the horizon. The final wave of Imperial reinforcements was coming in fast, but she knew deep down that this would be their last push. They had almost won. Almost. Stroud, look. Terran's voice broke through her comms, filled with a note of awe. The Imperial Justice, it's losing altitude. They're scrambling to regain control, but their systems are failing. A fierce grin spread across Stroud's face. What was happening? The Empire was collapsing. Their once unshakable command was on the verge of falling apart, their weaponry failing them. "They're done," she muttered, her voice a low growl of satisfaction. "Not yet," came Rhea's voice, sharp and determined. "We've still got work to do. Don't let up now." Stroud nodded, focusing on the task at hand. Her fighters locked onto the remaining Imperial ships, unleashing one last barrage of firepower. The enemy fleet was crumbling, its ships either exploding or retreating in disarray. In the heart of the city, Rhea stood at the communications hub, her fingers flying across the console as she watched the pulse continue to ripple outward, sending tremors through the Empire's fleet. The Empire's fleet was now in chaos, struggling to regain control. She had done it. The pulse had done its job. And yet, the battle wasn't over. Not until the Imperial Justice was finished. She turned to the other members of her team. "We've made a dent, but we need to finish it. If we don't bring that flagship down, they'll reorganize and fight back. Then we need to hit them hard," said one of her team members, his face bloodied from the earlier skirmishes but still resolute. "We've got one shot at this." Rhea took a deep breath. This was it. The final moment. She had seen the horrors of war, the devastation, the loss. But she had also seen the heart of humanity, its unyielding refusal to be defeated. And now, after years of suffering, of oppression, the Resistance was about to prove that they were more than just survivors. They were victors. Back in space, Stroud's squadron pressed the attack on the Imperial Justice. The once mighty ship was staggering, its hull riddled with holes from the combined assault. Stroud's heart pounded as she watched the flagship lurch, its engines sputtering, failing under the weight of the Resistance's onslaught. "Now everyone, fire everything you've got," Stroud shouted over the comms, her voice a command of pure defiance. The remaining fighters surged forward, their weapons blazing as they descended on the flagship in a flurry of laser fire. The Imperial Justice groaned under the assault, its shields flickering in and out of existence. Then with one final deafening explosion, the flagship broke apart. The Imperial Justice, the symbol of the Empire's might, split in two as its core exploded, sending debris scattering in all directions. The Resistance had done it. For the first time in days there was silence. The Imperial fleet was broken, its command shattered. Elysium had stood firm. On the ground, Rhea looked up at the sky. The signature explosion of the Imperial Justice lit up the horizon, a brilliant burst of light that seemed to stretch across the heavens. Her heart skipped a beat. The battle was over. The last of the Empire's forces began to retreat, their ships scattering as their morale collapsed in the wake of the destruction of their flagship. The survivors knew the fight was lost. The galaxy was no longer theirs to command. Rhea allowed herself a rare moment of relief, letting the exhaustion wash over her. The war had taken everything, friends, family, and countless lives, but humanity had not been crushed. Against all odds they had held on. And now they had won. "We did it," one of Rhea's team members whispered, looking up at the burning remnants of the Empire's fleet. Rhea gave a slow nod, the weight of their victory sinking in. It had cost them everything, but they had done what no one had thought possible. They had turned the tide, and they had made sure the Empire would never rise again. Captain Stroud landed her fighter on the cracked and scarred surface of Elysium, her squadron following close behind. The ground crew rushed forward to assist, but Stroud barely noticed. She was already disembarking, her boots crunching on the scorched earth beneath her. She paused for a moment, looking out over the ruined city, the city she had sworn to protect. The city that had become a symbol of humanity's defiance. "We did it, Captain," Terran said, stepping beside her. Stroud didn't answer at first, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The Empire was no more. Elysium stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For a long time she said nothing. But finally, after a long silence, she turned to Terran and smiled. "Yes, we did." As the sun began to rise over the charred remains of Elysium, a new dawn broke over the galaxy. The Empire was gone, and in its place the Resistance, the last humans, had forged a new path forward. The fight for survival had been brutal, and the scars would remain for generations to come. But the people of Elysium had proven something no one had ever thought possible: that humanity would never be extinguished. That no matter how powerful the Empire, no matter how overwhelming the odds, the human spirit could never be broken. And as the first light of the new era touched the ruins of the old world, the people of Elysium, of humanity, stood tall, ready to rebuild and ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. For the first time in years they had hope. And that hope, more than any weapon or army, would be their greatest strength in the days to come. The Empire had fallen. And the humans of Elysium would rise.